Yes guys, what's going on? So in today's video, we're going to be deep diving into the most important part of any house track, the drums. If your kicks, claps and hats aren't hitting hard enough and they ain't punching through, then you ain't got the energy to make a decent house track. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to make your drums punch harder and really cut through the mix. So without further ado, let's get into it.
I will love you endlessly.
Right, so let's start off with the foundation of any house track, the kick drum. So when selecting a kick, I choose a sample that has a strong low end and clear attack, just so it can really punch through that mix. So obviously it goes without saying, sound selection is the most important thing ever. I mean, if you have a kick that you put into your record and it's muddy, or it hasn't got enough low end, or it's not punchy enough, or it's not snappy enough, or whatever it is, and it doesn't fit that record, the track is never going to sound good and the drums are never going to sound good. So what I would suggest is listening to a few kicks, going through Splice or any sample packs that you've got, and I would suggest going through and finding maybe 2 or 3 and then picking between those 2 or 3 which one it is, which one's got that good thump, and then drag it into your DAW. So with this, we've got a kick here. Nice solid, nice thumping kick. So sometimes with kicks as well, it's not just a case of you have the kick and that's it. Sometimes you need to layer it, you need to put a top kick on the top of it. So what I'll do is I'm going to try and find a kick that is not part of this little section that we've got here, but one over here where the kick, it's not as punchy as I'd like it. Okay, so that one's not that punchy. So if we look at the waveform, you can see at the start, the punch here, there's hardly any punch to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to just put that in a 1-bar loop, which is what I always do. And then we're going to go through and just find some top kicks. There is some top kicks in some. So if I search for top kick in my library, so it's always great to have a good sample library, because if you don't have a good sample library and you want to find something, it's going to be a lot harder to find than it would be if you had, you know, your top kicks in there, or you wanted some wide claps or wide hats or whatever. So it's always good to have a big sample library. So let's have a look through some top kicks. Let's have a look in here. And we're just going to see what top kicks fit really nice with this kick. Okay, so that one fits quite nice. So what we're going to do is we're just going to grab this, we're going to duplicate this channel, obviously take these kicks off it, drag this underneath, and what I always tend to do is I always tend to just solo the 2 channels that you want, bring this channel that's got the top kick on it to as far down to 0 as you possibly can, so it's not, you can't hear it, and then all you're going to do is you're just going to listen. You're going to bring it up and you're just going to listen until you think it sounds right. So I wouldn't look at the screen. Okay, so round about there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shape it. So if we just make sure as well that with these top kicks, the low end is took out of them, because if the low end isn't took out, sometimes you can get some frequencies at the bottom. So see, so we've got some low end frequencies there. We want to take them out because the kick is already giving us maybe we'll just open it up a bit as well to really make that kick come through. So that's how you get these top kicks. If your kick isn't punchy enough and you think it fits right anyway, then add a top layer to it. You know, add a mid layer to it. You know, sometimes I've seen people who had tracks and they've got 3 or 4 because they like the attack of the first kick, they like the mid section of the second kick, and they like the back end of the third kick, and people do that. Right, so let's move on to the claps. So with the claps, I normally have 3 layers. So I'll have a wide clap, I'll have one that's kind of centered, and then I'll have one that's kind of in the middle. It always kind of seems to work. So this is the first clap. This is the second. This is the third. Really wide, that one. So if you're listening on monitors, you'll be able to hear that that's goes from being quite in the middle to being really wide in that third one. So what you can do is just to give it a bit more extra weight is you can just, so I can go into my sample packs and I'll just type in snare. So if we layer a snare onto these claps now, it's going to end up where, let's just go through and see what, with these claps, what snare would work perfectly. Because this snare, all it's going to do is just give it an extra punch.
2 hours later.
Okay, so we found a snare. Right, so what we're going to do, just going to duplicate this all the way across. And all this snare is going to do is just going to give us some extra body to this clap. So again, like we did before with the top kicks, we're going to lower this one right the way down to 0. And what we're going to do is just going to listen and see by bringing the volume up where this snare is going to sit. Okay, so I like it around about there. But what I don't want is I don't want any low end. And I don't really want this, I just want the body of the snare. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take some low end, some high end out of that as well. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure that these don't overpower the kick. Sick. Okay, it sounds wicked. What I like to do is I like to group all these together, call these claps, go onto the EQ, grab my EQ8, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to take out the low end of these claps because we don't need them. We don't want it to overlap with that kick drum. We really want these claps to punch through, but at the same time we want that kick to punch through as well, and we don't want any of the frequencies to overlap. So let's just listen through to this and just see where we need to cut out. Obviously we don't want it to be too much, so it sounds like that because it sounds rubbish. Maybe we could add some body to it. Right, now let's talk about hats and percussion. Hats and percussion are probably the most vital bit to creating that groove that you want to make, and also creating the energy as well. So if you're open hats, I like to use a sample that's got quite a sharp attack and it's quite a long body to it. Not really long, but long enough. Bit like that. So it's like a 909 type of hat. And then similar to the claps, you can layer your hats as well. But I, in this instance, just layered it with one. So I layered it with another closed hat as well, which closed hat sounds like this. Again, quite sharp, but this one is quite short as well. So together they sound like this. And then percussion wise, I had this crispy loop as well, which I got from Big Z, which by the way, if you don't check out his things, his sample packs are crazy. So if you're going to get any sample pack, honestly, I'd recommend to get his. So this is the crispy loop out of that pack. It just adds body to everything. So the hats, the claps, it just adds so much body to them. And then I've also got this shaker as well. It's got some nice syncopated hats in it as well. And then the end hat that goes. And then all together, all of these drums, they sound like this. And again, what we're going to do is I'm going to group these layers. So I'm going to group these 4 layers and I'm going to call this percussion. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab an EQ. And again, what I want to do is I want to make sure that there's no low end in these tracks. So I'm just going to play them through. See, we are getting a tiny bit of low end here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that, I'm going to put it about here. Add a bit more body, maybe a little bit more high end. And together it all sounds like this. Maybe those hats are a bit too loud, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to group them, and I'm just going to lower them down a tiny bit. Maybe to about there. So what I'd also do as well is, if I had, say, another layer of hats, so I'm just going to duplicate this to show you. So I would slightly pan one to the left, say one slightly one to the right, just so that we've got a little bit of stereo width in there as well. So you see, it just adds that little bit of stereo width. So you're listening on monitors or headphones, you'll hear that. It just sounds a bit more stereo. So what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to add a tiny little bit of sidechain compression. Now the reason for this is because these are offbeat hats. I want to make sure that nothing is overlapping with each other. So I'm going to just sidechain to the kick again, as we did before with the bass. Grab a kick start, but I'm not going to put it on 100%, I'm going to put it on around 40%. Just so it's got that little bit of a bounce to it. Now a little cool trick as well that I actually learnt off James Hype was using Shaper Box and adding drive to it, but just doing it from around about 11,000 Hertz and just slightly lifting up that drive, so that you get the top end, it gets really, really crispy and nice. So about there, 22%. So if we were to do that all the way, it would sound like this. Sounds horrible. But if we bring it down to about 22%, sounds perfect. Just that little bit of saturation is just nice on the top end. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to favour that percussion. And I'm going to see if I've got some congas or some rim shots or something, just to keep that energy going a bit. So let's have a listen through to, let's say this one. And what we're going to do is just going to play the drum beat, and I'm just going to play some congas and just see what happens with them. Okay, so maybe I like that one. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I don't want it all playing, so I want to shape this a bit. I want to make sure that the transients are quite tight, especially with congas as well, because they can become quite messy otherwise if you don't fix these. So what I can do here is I go into this little mode here, go into warp, beats transient mode, and then press this little arrow here and bring this down until all I'll do is shape the transients. So just keep it onto there. Then what you're going to do is just going to duplicate that, because it won't, if you do it on one bit of thing, it's not going to translate to all the others. So you need to duplicate them all across. So what I'm going to do now is do exactly what I did before, put that on 0. And I'm going to go now and go through and just keep higher in the volume until I think it's perfect. Again, we're going to just drag this and we're going to put this into the percussions thing. So we've got that side chain going and we've got the saturation on top of it. It sounds like this. Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to see, maybe we could add like a rim shot or something to that. So maybe like this one we could add on like a syncopated thing where it goes off beat. So it's like, we want it to go bagat, so it's perfect. And then again, down to 0, put that on that 1 bar loop there, on a 2 bar loop there, like this, so we can listen to it. Okay, so then we can just grab this now, duplicate it across. So now we've got that adding a bit of variation, because variation is very, very important when it comes to tech house, because it cannot get boring. Again, I'm going to drag this into here, so we've got that high end and we've got that low end took out a bit. Okay, so now we're going to process the drums a little bit. So we're going to add things like saturation, distortion, stuff like that, just to make the drums really, really punchy and make them really punch hard without needing to crank that volume. Right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some Saturn. Grab Saturn. And it doesn't actually have to be Saturn. It can be the Ableton stock plugin. It can be anything. It just needs to add something extra, some more dynamics, so that it really, really shines through this kick. Now what you want to keep in mind as well is that before we start doing this, is that you don't want to overdo it. Because if you start overdoing it, it'll end up where everything just sounds too distorted and it'll just sound horrible. So what we're going to do is going to play the kick through. Just going to add some subtle. That's what it sounds like if it was like fully going. Just going to add that band just from about 500 hertz, just adding that band to it. Just that bit, a little punch. Let that really punch through. And we're going to do exactly the same with the claps. We're going to add some satin or any saturation, as I said before. It can be anything. So again, just going to add some satin to these claps. So from around about, I'd say around about 1,500 hertz. Just want to push. So if we push it too much, it sounds like that, but making it push through. And again, we're going to do it with the hats. Just add a little bit more distortion to it. So from around about with the hats, I'd say around about 5,000 hertz. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of, literally like 1 dB. And then after that, I'm going to just alter the volumes. So now we've got to talk about reverb. Again, can be key elements to this. You know, it just adds a bit of space to the drums, adds a bit of character. But again, you have to be careful with this, because if you do it too much, it'll end up where it just sounds washed and the drums won't sound very good. And with any type of house music, you don't want to lose that punch. If you lose the punch, then it's just not going to hit hard enough. So I'm just going to add a little bit of room reverb. So what I like to do is go onto the Valhalla Room, put it on the, group all the drums together so they're all in one group, and just bring down the mix. See if it's too much, it sounds like. Just messing with that decay and the mix and the pre-delay as well. I cut it at around about 7,000 to 7,500. And then if we add that with the bass line, it'll sound like this. Really crispy, really nice. Not overdoing it, you know, just keeping it nice and tight. Making sure that those percussion elements don't overlap with anything else, and just really keeping it tight and nice so it really punches through your mix. And then the last little bit that I like to do is go onto the actual drum bus, and I'm just going to put on a compressor. Now, the compressor that I like to use on here is, if you go into audio effects and type in the glue compressor, you see one that says full parallel. Now what you got to do here is just mess with the threshold and just make sure that that threshold is suiting your track. And that's it for drum processing, making your drums sounding punchy and stuff. You just always got to just remember that, you know, whether you're going to add EQ, whether you add reverb, whether you're going to add compression, whether you're going to add any effects onto these drums, that you don't overdo it, because if you overdo it, it'll end up sounding like horrible, and it'll just end up sounding all muddy. And as soon as you play that in a club, and I've had experience of this, I've made a track and I've gone into the club and it just sounds like a muddy mess. It sounds like someone is farting on a microphone basically, and yeah, it doesn't sound great and it's not a good look. Once you get the right sound selection and you have the right elements to put in and you put them in the right places, you don't want to then ruin it by overdoing things and not taking out low end where you need to take out low end and things like that. So make sure you like, subscribe, comment on the channel. What do you want to see me do next? Do you want me to see me do bass lines, whatever it is, vocal processing, anything? Let me know in the comment section and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.